Now, although these are flat layers, we can construct them into a shape using them the same way you'd build a house of cards. So this layer will need to rotate in order to make a top for our underwater lab. So I'll open up the rotation parameters, and now here, rather than changing the rotation value, I'll just change this layer's orientation. So I'll change the X value for orientation to a positive 90 degrees. Next, we'll make a new view which looks through the camera. So from the Comp panel pull-down, we can choose New Comp Viewer here. Rather than having this at 4 views, we'll create this with 1 view. And we'll want to look through our active camera. Here we can see the sub coming together, but there are some other parts in the scene as well that we need to move around. The first part we'll want to move around is the layer directly above this called sub top rail. This is just a small element that will help build the shape of the lid. So we'll click on this and we can see that it's a layer immediately below the sub lid. Now if we click and drag on the axis using the selection tool and dragging on the Z axis, we can drag it out to the side. Now if we go back to the other tab using Alt-Shift and the comma key, we can see in the lower view, by simply using the scroll wheel to zoom in, that the two layers seem to have a very wide gap. Don't be fooled by this. What's happening here is that the top layer has an alpha channel, and the line we see here, representing the entire width of the submarine's lid, is actually taking into account the alpha channel as well. Because the alpha channel is clipping part of that lid, the image for the lid doesn't extend all the way to the edge of the layer. If we double click on the layer, we can see that here represented by that green area around the outside. So there are some blank pixels around the edge of this layer, but After Effects takes into account the entire size of the layer when we look at it in 3D. Again, we'll use the Alt-Shift and the comma key to go back through the tabs. Now that the top rail is situated on the right-hand side of our underwater lab, let's make one on the other side. By opening up the position values, we can see where this is located on the Z value. By duplicating it, then typing P on the keyboard to open up the position values for the duplicate, all we need to do is change the values for the Z depth from a negative value to a positive value. If I use the orbit tool, I can spin around and see that this layer isn't quite lining up. You want to make those adjustments as you go along, and if we click on the layers, we'll see that we need to bring each one of these up just a little bit. In order to do that, I can click on both of them, then use the axis for either to bring those up a bit. We'll leave those as is for now, then work on another layer. We'll close these up and take a look at the sub top. Now the submarine's top is simply just a small shape made in Photoshop with a couple straight lines as antenna or periscope for the top of the submarine. In order to place this closer to the center of the submarine, all we'll need to do is switch to the selection tool by using the V on the keyboard, then click and drag on the X-axis to drag it to the middle. One final layer that requires only a little bit of movement is a ladder. So with the layer selected, I'll grab the ladder Z-axis and just drag it out to the left. We also have a propeller layer directly above this, which will be part of the submarine's animation. Now the propeller needs to be rotated as well as positioned, so first we'll position it by clicking on it, then moving the position of this layer by using the Z-axis. By typing R on the keyboard, we can then change the value for its orientation to -90. We'll close this up. Next we'll focus all the way down at the bottom. In order to complete the next part of modeling, I'll need a little more room in the timeline, so I'll simply open up the timeline window a bit, close up the windows, and then I'm going to shy the layers that we've already modified. So I'll select one layer that I want to shy, then holding the Shift key down, select all of the others. I'll shy these, then turn on the shying for the entire composition. Next, we'll take a look at these 11 layers. If I double click on any one of them, you can see that it's simply a Photoshop document of a circle with a little bit of gradient noise in it. I'll use Alt-Shift and comma or Option-Shift comma on a Mac to go back to the previous tab. Rather than turning off all of the other layers, I'll simply solo all of the ring pieces that we have exposed in the timeline by selecting them all, then using the solo button. I'll deselect all of these by using F2, then move them apart just a little bit. I'll take the bottommost layer, then move it to the right just a little bit, holding down the Shift key to constrain its movement. Then I'll select the last layer, or the layer at the top of the series. Then drag this one to the left. Again, I'll hold down the Shift key to constrain the movement. Then I'll select all of these by holding down the Shift key and clicking on the bottommost layer. Now with all of these selected, I'll go to the Window pull-down menu in order to open up the Align and Distribute panel. Here I can either align the layers or distribute them equally along the horizontal axis. I want to do just that by using this button in the Distribute Layers panel. This will only work on 2D layers, so we have to do this before we turn these into 3D layers. But once they're distributed, we can then make them 3D layers by simply clicking on any one of the 3D switches. Because they're all selected, all of them will become 3D layers at once. We're done with the Align panel, so we can close that one out. Next, we'll want to change the orientation of these layers. So typing R on the keyboard reveals the orientation and rotation for all of them. If I change the value now for one of them by clicking on the Y value and changing it to 90 degrees, all of the selected layers will receive the exact same change. I'll twirl these all up. Then using the Orbit Camera tool and deselecting them using F2, I can see that we've made something that looks almost like a volumetric shape. You can add more layers to this process to make your volumetric shape even more dense. But remember, all of these layers are only 1 pixel deep, so there will be a point in your rotation or your camera view where you'll be able to see through all of these layers as those 1 pixel sides face camera. We'll unsolo all of these to reveal our entire lab.